Hi there, my name is Simon and welcome to my new channel where we're going to talk about the political life of the world states and current events. In order not to waste your time, I'll go straight to the topic. So, over the past month, after the retreat of Russian troops from the Kiev region and the northeast, we've been watching how Ukrainian soldiers are fighting on the eastern side of the country. Also, the conflict turned into a stalemate. The bombing of the Azovstal steel plant continues, and the soldiers of the Azov battalion are fighting with the last forces. Vladimir Putin ordered the remaining soldiers to surrender. However, life is still coming out of the ruins. A few days ago, 344 citizens were evacuated from Mariupol. President Zelensky said they arrived safely overnight in Zaporozhye. On May 9th, the victory parade was held on Red Square, at which Putin spoke about NATO expansion and neo-Nazis, as well as a preemptive strike.
В открытую шла подготовка к очередной карательной операции на Донбассе, к вторжению на наши исторические земли, включая Крым. Блок НАТО начал активное военное освоение прилегающих к нам территорий. Россия дала упреждающий отпор агрессии. Это было вынужденное, своевременное и единственно правильное решение.
In the end, he did not declare any mobilization or war. Probably he's letting us know that everything is going according to plan. And today, I want to talk about how pointless and ridiculous this war is. The reasons for war are multiple. Sometimes they start for ethnic reasons, sometimes for long-standing enmity between peoples, old grievances, and some wars are the nature of conquest. It's impossible to justify starting a war, but there is usually a logical explanation, a plan, or a reason. This war in which civilians in the Russian-speaking cities of the second-largest Slavic state lose their lives, where Ukrainian and Russian soldiers die, has no reasoning at all. Putin's reasons can stand up even the basic critics. Now, it's impossible to know the real reason. He either wanted to raise his rating or reread too many books about World War II and want to become the new Marshal Zhukov, or just wants to leave a bloody and dirty trace in history. Nobody knows. But we do know the one that's been stated. The reason is that Putin's protecting the people living in the Donbass region, who have been suffering from Ukrainians for years. And in Ukraine, according to Putin, the Nazi regime has seized power and is holding the population hostage, and he, Putin, will come now and deliver everyone from the evil. For this, he sacrificed the lives of Ukrainian civilians and Russian soldiers and decided to sacrifice the Russian economy and all of its achievements during 30 years of independence. Let's understand why people from Donbass don't need Putin's help. I'll not try to tell the history of Donbass now, but I will, however, explain my point of view on this subject in one of the future videos. Now, I'll explain you briefly. Russia seized Crimea during the change of power in Ukraine. After that, groups of militants under the command of Igor Girkin, with the support of Russia, invaded Ukraine and tried to conquer the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. There have been pro-Russian protests in many other Ukrainian cities. Yes, it was possible then. Protests are also common in Ukraine since it's a democratic country, but they failed everywhere because most people didn't want to adhere to Russia. In Donetsk and Luhansk, backed by Russia, proxy states with bandit regimes, and whoever is militarily stronger is right power systems have been created. Many people left, and those who chose to stay lived in unrecognized territory with an average salary of $200 at the level of African countries. Creating such unrecognized territories is Putin's strategy. He created them in Georgia, Moldova, and now in Ukraine. I'll also explain in another video how these regions have formed throughout time and why it's so easy to use them now. Meanwhile, while life was bad and hard in the so-called Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, the rest of Ukraine was developing. Reforms have been carried out. Visa-free travel has been introduced to Europe. The city of Mariupol, located a few kilometers from the DPR, has become one of the fastest-growing cities in Ukraine economically. The situation has gotten worse. If in the early years there was a direct war there, over time clashes have reduced, and in 21 only 25 people generally died. The parties somehow got along. And now, even so, Putin decided to start an all-out war. Could there be a way to avoid the war that started in 2014, without considering the insane and ridiculous geopolitical purposes of Vladimir Putin? How can these people be protected and directed to a happier and richer life? Well, first, you could avoid invading there. As we can see from the example of Mariupol, a city in the Donetsk region, people used to live well all this time, without any help from Russia. But because of Putin and his support for the invasion, because of his idea that DPR and LPR should not be a part of Ukraine, a large number of people have suffered in all these 8 years, and now everyone is suffering, forced to flee the country or hide in anti-bomb shelters, while the Russians will lose everything they have and return to the standard of living of the USSR in a few months. What could be done in 22 to solve the problems of Donbass? First of all, let's stop supporting the militants there and give them political asylum. It'd be better to judge them in court for their actions, but you can also offer asylum if you are so eager to help them, and transfer these territories under the control of Ukraine. As we have seen in the major Russian-speaking cities of Mariupol and Kharkiv, everything was fine with their inhabitants until Putin's army came to them. Maybe there were some minor issues with the Russian language in Ukraine since 2014, but people certainly didn't want these problems to be solved by firing tanks and artillery at their city. Instead of a political solution to a situation in which no one is threatening anyone, Putin has started a fratricidal war. Everyone loses and everyone suffers. So, to the question, where have you been in all these 8 years since 2014 that Putin likes to ask, there's only one answer. Why did you come there, Putin? Nobody asked for your help there. 8 years ago, Russians in Donbass lived and prospered, and you began a war in the region before deciding to attack the entire country. Now, about fascism and the drug addicts gang in power. In Ukraine, as in any other country, there are unpleasant political forces. Russia has them too. They are organizing the Russian March, but they are not in power in Ukraine. Ukraine has chosen a man who did not even speak Ukrainian at all during the elections, a person of Jewish descent who was a famous Russian-speaking actor. This man proved to be incredibly brave and cold. He did not capitulate, he did not give up, and he keeps up fighting. Neither he or his party, which has a majority in parliament, have anything to do with Nazism, fascism, or nationalism. This is simply a false statement. It's Putin's invention. Putin's troops are waging war in Ukraine, not against Nazis or nationalists, but against all the people of a neighboring country and the regular army of that country. People are ready to fight to the last breath and successfully resist one of the largest armies in the world, because these people do not want to live under Putin's control. They want to live freely, choose their leaders, decide for themselves which way to go, with whom to be friends, and with whom not. I have many friends and relatives who believe in the propaganda from governmental TV channels, and all these tales about neo-Nazism, which Russians are supposed to be fighting against, about Donbass, which Russians are supposed to be defending. This belief can be understood. People want to cling to at least something to believe that they're on the side of good. But no, Putin's Russia in this story acts as an absolute and hopeless evil. This is the truth, and we need to say it out loud. I'll try to do this always. Now, the news of the war had unfortunately become routine. Russian troops largely remained in their previous positions in the east. They cannot move forward and occupy the major cities. This will lead to massive losses for both military and civilian staff, and the Ukrainian army does not have enough force to launch a large-scale counterattack. Many countries from the Occident support Ukraine with artillery and equipment. There is a terrible irony in the fact that Vladimir Putin himself has brought to life what he has always feared. For years, he has talked about the Occident dreaming of straggling Russia, although in reality there is no unified Occident. Many countries were going roughly in the same direction, based on democratic principles, but at the same time had many contradictions between them on fundamental issues. It was Germany that flirted with Russia, wanting to have favorable gas prices. Angela Merkel was a frequent guest in Moscow, and her predecessor, Gerhard Schröder, joined Rosneft's board of directors after leaving the post of chancellor, Rosneft being the main oil extracting and exporting company in Russia. It was Italy, whose Prime Minister Berlusconi became friends with Putin. It was France and England with their interests and needs. In the end, it was the United States, during Putin's rule, 5 administrations have already changed their relations. Some were better, some worse, but the Russian president always succeeded in finding the right pressure points and handled each one, including the current one. In general, this very West has never acted as a united entity, which Putin has used successfully for many years. Putin has seen the embodiment of his nightmare in all the countries of Europe and North America. After setting aside their contradictions, they gathered to repel Russian aggression. Sanctions on an unprecedented scale are introduced simultaneously and instantly. Even Switzerland has joined them, even though from 1815 it remained neutral and succeeded, being right in the middle of Europe, not taking part in either of the two world wars. Such unity was a complete surprise for the Russian authorities. Throughout his career, Putin has developed a kind of network of agents of European heads of the state close to him. This included, for example, the Czech Zeman and the Hungarian Viktor Orban. It seems that Putin expected that after organizing this special operation and punishing Ukraine, the West would split in the same way it had split before. Some will say that the situation is not very clear, some will look at the gas price and remain silent, and others will think, well, Kiev has already fallen and does not punch after the fight, and most likely that's exactly what would have happened. Everything went wrong when Kiev refused to surrender, and the Ukrainian armed forces successfully resisted the Russians. The first day of the war, when it became clear that there would be no blitzkrieg, proved decisive. They gave birth to unity, unique even by historical standard, when England, France, Germany, USA, Poland, Italy, Japan, and many others are on one side of the barricades, and on the other hand, Russia is in absolute solitude. Only 4 countries supported Russia in the UN vote. These are Belarus, where Lukashenko is completely dependent on Putin, Syria, North Korea, and Eritrea, a small African dictatorship that I don't think you've heard of until today. That's it. He doesn't support any of the 193 sovereign member states of the UN. Putin has not found any allies. There are several reasons. First, society in those countries unambiguously opposes a major war in Europe, where there is an obvious aggressor and an obvious victim. In these countries, the trauma of the world wars is still strong, and the ghosts of the past quickly appear in their memory. You could say, it's hard to believe that this is not the case in Russia, which has suffered the most from World War II. But nothing is surprising here, because over the years, Putin's principles have evolved from never again to we can do it again. There are practically no people to remember the war, and those who are still alive are very old and do not have a significant influence. All this has made it possible to change the very essence of the Great Victory holiday in the direction needed by the authorities. And thus, the day of the Great Victory became the day of militarism. Modern military vehicles are transported on the streets of the city, designed to kill as many people as possible in shorter time at lower cost. The official rhetoric is not about the tragedy of the worst war in history, but about the military prowess and military might of the Russian army. In Europe and the USA, such parades are not accepted, and people are afraid of war there. The bombing of cities terrifies them. People hiding in Kiev and Kharkiv subways make the British and Germans remember their grandparents, who hid from the bombs in the cellars of Coventry and Dresden. They create public pressure, the most important factor of the mass exodus of Western brands from Russia. IKEA and Apple are faced with a choice, to keep the Russian market or to keep the company as a whole, because staying in Russia risks facing dissatisfaction with customers at home, and the choice in such a situation is obvious. In addition, this choice is facilitated by a sharp depreciation of the ruble and difficulties with logistics and delivery of goods to Russia. So, the main reason the world is so monolithic is society's rejection of an aggressive war of conquest in Europe. Therefore, Ukraine will keep receiving anti-tank and anti-aircraft weapons. This is important, but one must understand that wars are not won by missiles alone. Ukraine will receive phenomenal support from the entire free world. But celebrity tweets with warm words addressed to the defenders of Kharkiv will not change the situation at the front. Zelensky, from the first day of the war, asked NATO to ensure a regime of closed sky over Ukraine. and each time he is denied. To understand why, you need to understand what's the closed sky regime. Its essence is that a certain party, which is not a party of the conflict, but has sufficient force, declares that the sky over the territory of hostilities can no longer be used by anyone. Since World War I, aviation has made great changes in military science, and the conquest of air supremacy offers a huge advantage. A weaker ground army can fight a stronger one if it's covered by planes. Aircraft for the bombing of strategically important objects, rifle army columns and troops behind enemy lines. Closing the sky removes the possibility of attacking from the air, which equalizes the forces of the parties. How does it happen technically? First, the enemy's air defense forces are destroyed, and then the one who closed the sky wins air supremacy. Any aircraft belonging to the parties to the conflict is shot down either from the ground or from fighter jets. As a result, no one can fly and land armies slaughter each other without air support, just like in the 19th century. The closed sky regime was introduced with the help of NATO in 2011 during the civil war in Libya. The UN Security Council allowed it. The closure of the sky helped the rebels to defeat Gaddafi's troops. They did not have their own aircraft. Therefore, the destruction of the planes of the ruling regime was of decisive importance. Why is NATO not ready to introduce a closed sky regime in Ukraine, despite numerous persistent requests and even demands from Zelensky? Well, first of all, it will mean a direct clash between the alliance and Russia. That is, the Russian fighter will be shot down not just by an American missile, but by an American missile fired by an American soldier. In a situation where Putin openly threatens the world with nuclear weapons, these can lead to unpredictable consequences. Now, Russia has air supremacy. Its aviation is stronger and more numerous than Ukrainian. If you theoretically apply the closed sky regime, let's take nuclear weapons out of the equation for now, then this advantage will be eliminated, and the Ukrainian army will easily win on the ground. The war will end with the defeat of the Russian Federation armed forces on the territory of Ukraine. What will happen next is a big question, since Putin in such a situation is likely to be able to retain power and immediately begin to plan revenge, and perhaps he will finally go crazy and blow up Kiev with an A-bomb. So perhaps the consideration of prolonging the war in order for the Putin regime to stagger in Russia is also one of the reasons why the West does not actively intervene in the fighting there. No one expected the Ukrainian army to fight so bravely and stubbornly. Even the Pentagon thought that Kiev would be taken in a few hours. It's not possible to help Ukraine in the current situation with troops and the closed sky regime. Unfortunately, when French President Macron says the worst is yet to come, he's most likely right, but there is no other scenario, and the West will not help here. The only chance for Putin and his institution to avoid this scenario is to understand that everything went wrong, that none of the plans worked, put an end to the war and start negotiations to resolve the conflict. But there are no signs of such an agreement at this time, so we will prepare for what is to come. That was all. Thank you for watching, and I'm waiting for you to subscribe to this new channel to be up to date with the upcoming events. See you next time.